All right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yes, hello.
This time, we're going deep into the world of financial fraud.
Ooh, exciting.
And, I was looking over those excerpts that you sent over about fraud identification and prevention,
Yes.
and I gotta say, it's pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's really relevant to a lot of our listeners.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, who hasn't
Yeah,
worried about fraud at some point, right?
absolutely. So let's sort of unpack this a little bit.
Yeah, let's dive in.
Okay, so one of the things that I noticed right off the bat in this document is they keep talking about the need for speed.
Right, yeah.
Like, it's not just about catching the bad guys.
Uh-huh.
It's about catching them fast.
Yeah, it's like they say time is money, right?
Right.
And in this case, it's literally true. Like, the
Yeah.
faster you can react to fraud, the less damage is done.
Exactly. So what are some of the things that they're suggesting to make sure that...
Well, they talk about things like having really clear incident response plans. Okay.
So, like, everybody knows exactly what to do the moment fraud is detected.
Right.
Like, think predefined steps for things like immediate account freezes,
Uh-huh.
tracing funds,
Okay.
all while making sure that you're still complying with all the regulations.
Right, because there's a lot of those.
Oh, tons. It's a whole other layer of complexity.
Yeah.
It's a lot to juggle.
So it's almost like having like a fire drill
Exactly.
for fraud.
Yeah, like everybody needs to know their role,
Mm-hmm.
what to do, where to go,
Okay.
who to contact.
So speaking of contacting people, they talk a lot about these employee and vendor hotlines.
Oh, yeah, the hotlines are key.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about why they're emphasizing that so much.
Well, it's all about giving people a way to report anything suspicious.
Right.
Whether it's an employee who notices something weird in the accounting system
Uh-huh.
or a vendor who gets a strange request, it gives them a direct line to raise a flag.
Okay, so it's not just about relying on like some fancy technology to catch everything. Right, exactly. I mean, technology definitely plays a big role.
You okay?
But you still need that human element, that gut feeling that something's not right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And speaking of technology, the document goes deep into some pretty advanced stuff.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, they talk a lot about surveillance systems and models thresholds.
Okay, now you're losing me a little bit. What does that even mean?
Basically, they're talking about AI,
Okay.
algorithms that are constantly scanning for unusual patterns.
So, like, if my typical transaction history is, buying groceries and paying bills,
Uh-huh.
and then suddenly I'm making a huge purchase in some other country.
Exactly. Those systems would pick up on that red flag instantly
Okay.
and trigger an alert.
Wow, so it's like having a 247 digital detective.
Exactly. They're always watching, always learning, always looking for anything out of the ordinary.
Okay, that's pretty reassuring, actually.
Yeah, it's definitely a powerful tool in the fight against fraud.
So we've got the rapid response, the hotlines, the AI.
Yeah.
What else is in this document?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
They also focus a lot on complaint management processes.
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah.
So regulators are concerned about how companies handle complaints.
Absolutely. They're using it as a measure of fair treatment for consumers.
I see.
So they're looking at things like how quickly are companies responding to complaints?
Okay.
Are they actually addressing the root cause?
Okay.
Are they taking steps to prevent similar issues from happening again?
So it's not just about resolving the individual complaint.
Right.
It's about looking at the bigger picture of how companies treat their customers.
Exactly.
And speaking of bigger picture, there's a whole section on data sharing and open banking rules.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
And it's definitely an area where consumers need to be extra careful.
What are some of the things that they highlight in the document?
Well, they talk a lot about the need for clear authorization procedures,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that consumers understand exactly who has access to their data and for what purpose. And they also raise concerns about things like account freezes.
Right, because that can be a real headache.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It can be incredibly disruptive.
So it's a delicate balance
It is.
between protecting consumers from fraud and also making sure that they have access to their own money.
Exactly. It's a tough needle to thread.
Yeah, and with open banking, it gets even more complicated, right?
Oh, absolutely, because now you're potentially sharing your financial information with third-party apps,
Right.
and that adds a whole other layer of risk.
So it's more important than ever for consumers to really understand what they're signing up for.
Right. Read the fine print, make sure you trust the app,
Okay.
and understand how your data is being used.
So with all this talk about data and technology, it seems like the link between fraud prevention and cybersecurity is becoming even more critical.
Oh, absolutely. They're two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
Can't really have one without the other.
So what are some of the key things that companies need to be doing in terms of cybersecurity?
Well, the document talks a lot about the need for advanced threat detection,
Uh-huh.
both in terms of physical security
Okay.
and in the cloud.
Right, because that's where a lot of the data is stored these days.
Exactly. And they need to be constantly monitoring for any signs of intrusion.
So it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
No, no, it's a constant battle.
Okay.
The fraudsters are always innovating, so companies need to stay one step ahead.
So it's an arms race.
It is, absolutely.
Wow. Okay, so we've talked about the technology.
Yeah.
We've talked about the processes.
Uh-huh.
What about the human element?
Oh, that's crucial too. And the document really emphasizes that.
Right.
They talk about the need for demonstrable, effective board oversight.
So it's not enough to just have systems in place.
Right.
There needs to be clear accountability from the top down.
Exactly. The board needs to be actively engaged,
Okay.
asking tough questions, making sure that the company is doing everything it can to prevent fraud.
So it's a whole ecosystem.
It is, yeah.
From the boardroom to the customer service calls, everybody needs to be on high alert.
Absolutely. It's a team effort.
Man, this is way more complex than I thought going into it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area.
It is.
And it's constantly evolving.
So what does all this mean for our listeners? Like, what's the big takeaway?
Well, I think the good news is that the fight against fraud is getting a lot more sophisticated.
Anyway.
But that also means that we need to be more aware and more vigilant than ever before.
Right. Like, we can't just assume that the banks and the companies are going to take care of everything.
Exactly. We need to be proactive about protecting ourselves.
It makes you wonder, like, what responsibility do companies have to educate their customers about all this?
That's a good question.
Right. Because it's one thing to have all these systems in place, but if consumers don't understand how they work or what to watch out for, then they're still vulnerable.
Absolutely. And I think there's definitely room for improvement in terms of consumer education.
Yeah, that's a whole other deep dive we could do sometime. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
I think so, yeah.
Hopefully our listeners have gotten a better understanding of just how complex this world of fraud prevention is
Yeah, and how important it is.
and how important it is to stay informed and stay vigilant.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, well, thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
My pleasure, as always.
And to all our listeners out there, stay safe out there.
Stay safe.